Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today we will continue with the place where we stopped, from the place where we stopped last week. So we have been discussing about the Rupa, and especially last week was dedicated to discuss few points. That is how Rupa has been explained within the doctrine or the canon, and then why Rupa is considered as ultimate reality according to the Theravada tradition. So then today our focus would be about the Rupa Kalapa, because we cannot discuss about the Rupas unless we touch its practical aspect. The practical aspect means how they exist in the environment, how they exist in the world. Normally, like the Namas, the Rupas exist in clusters, in groups. So such a cluster of Rupas are called a Rupa Kalapa. It's called a Rupa Kalapa. So we cannot find Rupas individually apart from these clusters. We cannot find these Rupas apart from the clusters. So in order to gain a clear picture about the Rupas, we have to look into a cluster and find out how they exist within a cluster. So that also would reveal the functions of the Rupas separately, individually, but we have to keep in mind that they always perform, they always act in groups with correlation with each other. So actually they coexist. So if you have I hope you got the handout. Yesterday night I was able to deliver it. Before we go into the lecture, I would like to remind in the lecture number 1, we discussed the points, because it would be easier if we can note down the numbers. In the lecture number 1, we discussed from 1.1 till 1.5 in the handouts. Lecture number 2, we have discussed 1.6 to 1.8. Then in lecture number 3, today we are going to discuss from 1.9 till 1.21. 1.9 till 1.21. You can note down them, because if whenever you recap the lectures, rewatch them with the handouts, it will be easier for you to understand which points I was discussing in a particular lecture. So today we are going to discuss from 1.9 to 1.21. I hope you could note down it, right? So today our attention is to discuss about the Rupa Kalapa and how the 4 great elements exist in a Kalapa. In a Kalapa. So these are the 2 main points. I shall be focusing on them, on how the Rupas exist, 4 great elements exist in a Kalapa in few angles. So when we look into this, when we are studying the Theravada teaching, specifically Abhidhamma and some fundamentals of philosophical aspects of the tradition, we have to have 2 approaches. So normally as the disciples who are following the teachings of a master whom we call the Buddha, we normally first we study the realities, what the Buddha has mentioned about the reality, and then we try to interpret these realities, how the practical world, how the world we experience can be found based on these realities. So it's like first we find out the realities the Buddha has explained, and then we try to explain how the world is happening based on reality. Now first we study the Chitta Chetasikas, and then we try to figure out how a human being would work based on these Chittas, how these Chittas and Chetasikas function in the practical world. But when it comes to a teacher, the founder of the religion, what he finds is the experience. He experienced the reality. Reality means he had an experience about the world that humans are living, the world is existing, like forth, and then he penetrates into this reality. And then he finds out what there are. So, as disciples, we learn what there is according to the teachings, and then we try to interpret the existence of world based on these realities. But when it comes to a teacher, a founder, what he finds is experiencing. He experienced the world, how it functions, and then he penetrates into this experience and find out what really exists. So therefore, we have to, when we study, we also have to keep in mind these two approaches. Normally, we miss out this approach. We mostly focus on this kind of an approach. So that's why we first study the reality and try to interpret the world based on that. In some cases, if we only follow this approach, some points we may miss out some points. So therefore, while explaining some philosophical notions in the teachings, especially when it comes to the Rupa Kalapa, clusters of Rupas, the clusters of mentalities, I would take both the approaches. So then what happens, whatever is missed by this approach could be understood by this approach. Whatever is missed by this number one approach, we could understand it with the number two approach. So first, I would first, if we call this as number one and number two approach, because this is what happened in the first place. The founder had to go into the experience and see what there is. Then the disciples study the reality that he has already named, and then try to interpret and try to understand the world based on that. So, but first, as disciples, I would take this approach in the first place, and then go into this second approach. So today we are going to discuss about the Rupa Kalapa. How, now when we think about a Kalapa, 4 great elements. Patavi, Apo, Tejo and Vayu, and we have a Kalapa. We have 4 great elements and the Kalapa. So we may, what the Buddha, according to Theravada traditions, when the Buddha understood the world, what he did was he understood a Kalapa. When he penetrates into these physical bodies, he found that there are just particles, the remaining particles that cannot be divided any further in physical aspect. So then within a Kalapa, he has understood the 4 great elements. But what we are going to do today is we study the 4 great elements and how a Kalapa is built with 4 great elements. So these are the two different approaches. So today we are going to follow this approach. This is what we are going to study today. And the next next week I'll be taking 2 days for this approach. In the next week we'll be taking the other approach. How should we understand the 4 great elements by penetrating into a Kalapa. So these are the two different ways that I'm expecting to follow in these few lectures. So after we have done the second approach means from Kalapa to the 4 great elements, you will find out the difference. That it will be clear to you what do I mean here by this. So then we'll move into the topic. Rupa Kalapa are the clusters. Rupa Kalapa are the clusters of Rupas. Rupas can never exist alone, individually by themselves. They always exist in clusters, in groups. A cluster of Rupas is called a Rupa Kalapa. Cluster of Rupas is called a Rupa Kalapa. It can never exist, Rupas can never exist alone. And the generation of these Kalapas were called a Santati. Generation of these Kalapas were called Santati. I think I gave it in the previous handouts. Then there are 2 ways that how a Rupa Kalapa can be explained, which I've already mentioned. Explaining the extended Kalapas as the gathering of 4 great elements. Explaining the 4 great elements as the components of an extended Rupa Kalapa. So these are the 2 approaches. So the very basic quality of Rupa is that though individually they are not extended realities, extended means realities that take a volume in the space, which has a volume, which are three-dimensional objects. So anything, so the very basic quality of Rupa is that whenever they come together, these natures come together, they manifest as extended reality, extended natures. A Rupa Kalapa is a three-dimensional thing which can be explained in terms of height, depth and length. Height, depth and length, which can be explained in three ways. So that's called a three-dimensional thing. In the reality, we don't have two-dimensional things, objects. Even we draw a triangle on a surface, at least there is some kind of a thickness in that what we have drawn. So this, therefore, in reality, what we experience is always 3D objects, not 2D objects. So the Rupa, the characteristic of Rupa is extended, it's extended nature. Extended means it can be explained in three different ways, right? So like normally we draw it like this, right? It has to be explained in 3D, three dimensions. So then Rupa Kalapa is an extended reality, extended thing, extended object. We better not to call it a reality, because though it can be found in the actual existence, that is how the Rupa exists, but still we can break it down intellectually. So breaking it means it can be reduced into its components. If something can be reduced into its components, it means that thing is not a ultimate reality. That is one of the very basic criteria within the tradition, right? So therefore, so first we will find out how is a Rupa Kalapa made out of its component matter. That's a very vital point. Now how this is made out, casually we have to understand how the four great elements are constituting a Kalapa, constituting a cluster of Rupa. A cluster of Rupa Kalapa means practically when we divide, we normally experience a body of Rupa, right? We have a body, a Rupa body, a material body. So when we look into this body with our wisdom, we may find out that it's made out of small particles. That is obvious, even it has been proven scientifically. Even from the age of Greeks in the Western world, they explain that Rupa is not a constant. It's not constantly spread out. It is a gathering of small particles which they call the atoms. Even the ancient philosophers, I forgot his name, Democritus or someone, who argued that Rupa is not a constant thing. It is constructed with small particles which have their own existence. So that is what a Rupa Kalapa means. It's not something that you don't need to argue that whether Rupa Kalapa can be found in the text or not. It's something very practical. When you divide a material body, we all know that this material body is not one thing. It can be, if you think about the human body, it can be it can be broken into 32 body parts. Even a small body part is made out of small particles. That is a very practical thing. So Rupa Kalapa means, sometimes people ask, where can you find a Rupa Kalapa within the text? It's not something that should be asked, because it's something very practical. Anything that is made out of, any matter that is made out of small things, particles, should have its tiniest particle, a particle that cannot be broken any further. That's very obvious. That is the units, the smallest physical units in the world. So that is what a Theravadians call a Rupa Kalapa. So if we take it out, a Kalapa, we hope it is of the shape of a globe, a round shape, a three-dimensional shape. Then how do we understand this existence of four great elements within this Kalapa? So it's a very nice philosophical explanation can be found within the Theravada tradition. So the four great elements are the hardness. We should know the four great elements. Hardness. Then we have the cohesion, the bonding force, cohesion. Yeah. Then we have heat or coldness. Then we have the bloating nature. The nature which pushes outwards, which has a outward push. So these are the 4 qualities. I think we have mentioned it in many places, many times, that realities according to the Theravada tradition are just natures. They are not stuff. But this Rupa Kalapa itself is a material stuff. We can call it, what do you call it? We normally call it substantial, yeah. It's a substance. Substance. Substance means something that consumes a volume in the space, which has a certain shape, which doesn't allow any other substance to come into its own place, own position. So this is the nature of a substance. So though the Kalapa is a substance, the natures which constitute this are just qualities, mere qualities. They are not substance by themselves. They are not substances by themselves. So how do we understand these 4 qualities within this substantial reality, substantial material object? So hardness, think about the hardness. Hardness is the most prominent and most significant in the material world. Without hardness, there would be no matter. Because the very basic quality of a matter is, it occupies a certain space. That's what we mention as it has a volume. Occupying a certain space means, in other words, it doesn't allow any other thing to occupy that place, that is the place where it is already existing. It doesn't allow any other substance to come into that space. Now if we think these 2 are substances, the phone and the digital pen, the phone as a substance doesn't allow this digital pen. Now for example, phone is located here. So the phone doesn't allow this substance to occupy or come into the space that it occupies already. So that is a very basic quality of substance. So what does it mean? It prevents the entering of another substance. That prevention, the quality that prevents such an entering is called the hardness. I'll repeat again. A substance doesn't allow another substance to come into that the space it has already occupied. So what is that quality which prevents that entry? It's the hardness. So a way of saying hardness, another way of explaining of hardness is a quality that doesn't let another substance to enter into the space where it is already located. So therefore, when we look into this substantial reality, substantial object, which is called the Rupa Kalapa, we find that one Kalapa doesn't let another Kalapa to come into its position. So what does it mean? The entire Kalapa, this volume of the Kalapa is filled with hardness. Even we talk about an electron or a quark or a neutrino, a force carrying particle, even a photon. Though a photon doesn't have a mass according to the physical science, still it's the substantial quality is there. So this substantial quality means, according to Theravadians, in Theravada perspective, it's the hardness itself. So therefore, when we talk about a Kalapa, how do we come into the qualities through a Kalapa? That's the hardness. Hardness is the most prominent and the most significant quality within this. So it's easy to find. Now then someone can ask the question, isn't the Kalapa the hardness? Isn't the Kalapa the hardness? But Theravadians, it seems like the hardness and the Kalapa are identical. It seems like. But Theravadians have another approach to think about this. So why is that? Because the hardness only itself cannot have a shape. It cannot have a shape. It's just a mere quality. So why did this hardness gain a certain shape? Why is it existing in a certain confined volume? Why it is not scattered in the air? Why it is not collapsing into its central focal point? The reason is there are 2 other forces which are acting upon this hardness, on this hardness. What happens is, the Theravada perspective, hardness exists. If I just draw it, it cannot exist by itself alone in the rarity according to the Theravada perspective. So what has happened is, if we think this is hard, okay, if I grow it larger hardness, what happens is, according to Theravadians, there is a quality that holds it, doesn't letting it to go away or get scattered in the air. It's a cohesion, bonding nature, which makes it to it makes it shrink. It just glues the thing. It doesn't let it to scatter. Or so what happens is a certain amount of hardness, a quantitative amount of hardness is kept in one certain place, that is held by a certain force, which we call cohesion. Or cohesion means a combination or binding few things together. Still it can be applied, but understand it as some kind of a force that holds the hardness in that particular position. Then what happens, if only this force is there, the hardness would collapse into the central point like a collapse of a star. A celestial body would naturally collapse due to its own gravitational force. Normally we say a sun has a gravitational force into its surface within the point of gravity. But since there is a thermodynamic reaction is happening, the heat is being, there are a lot of reactions going on due to heat, there is an outward force which goes against this. So then it becomes stable. So if the outward force is not there, the celestial body starts to shrink into its center. So it's something similar to that. But what happens, since if only this force is existing, the hardness would not be stable. So as a result, according to the law of necessity, there is a force that works outside, to the outside, an outward force. So what happens, these two forces get balanced. These two forces get balanced. Based on the strength of the forces, the amount, the volume may change. The volume may change. So when the gravitational force is high or the outward pressure is lower, the celestial body, the sun or a star would start to, the volume of the sun would decrease. So likewise, it matters how the size of the star would depend on how greater these two forces are. So as now this outward push, I call it the bloating nature. It's not a bloating, it's not a push that is direct only at one side. It is a push that happens to all the sides, all the directions. Cohesion is holding it and contracting it, while the push, outward push, is expanding this. So when these two forces come into the equilibrium, what happens? The hardness happens to exist in a certain space, certain area of space. So this roughly, if we think, if it happens to exist in a certain area without going outside or without completely collapsing into its focal center, that is due to these two forces. So now, isn't hardness identical with the kalapa? According to the Theravadians, no. Why is that? A kalapa has a specific shape. A kalapa has a specific volume. And why such a specific space or volume is obtained by a kalapa? That is due to the cohesion and the bloating nature. We call it apo and vayo respectively. If apo and vayo were not there, the patavi would not exist in a certain area of space. Either if apo is not there, it would get scattered. If vayo is not there, it would shrink into its focal point. If none of these are there, these things would not have any shape. The patavi would not have any shape. So therefore, a kalapa is not identical with hardness. Kalapa is something that can be seen or that can be felt, that can be known as existing due to the patavi, apo and vayo are coexisting. Then there is a coldness and heat. According to the Theravadians, their explanation is this hardness and all these other two forces perform their functions properly, since there is a certain kind of a heat or a coldness is existing within that. It's quite hard to explain what is the contribution of this tejo to this kalapa. So what the Theravadins explain is, it strengthens this kalapa, strengthens the remaining forces and the remaining qualities. Apo and Vayu are rather better explained as forces, rather than qualities. But they are, according to the tradition, they are qualities, but they are focal or forceful nature, or the forceful attribute, or focal whatever attribute is higher than mere quality. But hardness it is, rather than a force or rather than an action, its qualitative nature is more prominent. So heat also is a sort of a quality. According to the Theravadians, why the other three natures are performing their functions properly, that is due to the heat. That is due to the heat or the coldness. So so the kalapa is made. Now when these four elements, now if we really comparatively judge, now why hardness and heat are existing in a certain space without getting scattered, that is due to cohesion, apo. Cohesion. So why they are not shrunk or shrunk into a central point, and why don't they collapse? That is because of the outward push, bloating nature of Vayu. So why all these remaining three qualities are functioning properly? That is because of Tejo. And what is the surface for these qualities to act upon? That is the hardness. If there is no hardness, there is nothing for cohesion to hold upon or there is nothing for the Vayu or the bloating nature to bloat. So therefore, these four qualities are coexisting. They are happening at the same place. They are existing together. So this is how a kalapa is made according to the Theravada tradition. This is how a kalapa is made according to the Theravada tradition. So how is a kalapa made out of its component matter? I shall read this paragraph. Qualities of hardness and heat can be found in particular areas of space. These two qualities are confined to these tiny zones without scattering into the surrounding space or into inward cohesive force, which is called apo. At the same time, Vayu pushes these qualities away without letting them to contract or shrink into the central points of the zones. If this is a zone, otherwise it would have collapsed, like a star would collapse due to its gravitational force. It's called a gravitational collapse. The equilibrium under which the Rupa Kalapa is in is rather similar to hydrostatic equilibrium than dynamic equilibrium. So it's hard for me to pronounce this word, right? Equilibrium. So because in the dynamic equilibrium, it is how the reaction is happening. But when it comes to hydrostatic equilibrium, it is quite different. So even though in the stars that doesn't collapse to the gravitational force are in the dynamic equilibrium. It's not in the hydrostatic equilibrium. A hydrostatic equilibrium can be found how the atmosphere of the space is kept without letting it to go into the space, not the hard stuff. Hard stuff is due to the dynamic equilibrium. So I'm just making a simile. The Rupa Kalapa acts like as if a celestial body is not collapsing into a central focal point, but the equilibrium that we find in this reality in this Kalapa is rather closer to hydrostatic equilibrium. Thus, with these two forces working in opposite directions, Apo and Vayu, hardness and heat remain within a certain area of space without scattering or collapsing. Right? It is similar to how a celestial object does not undergo gravitational collapse. So that's why they are stable. These Kalapa become stable because of these two forces. When the four great elements, material qualities coexist, they manifest as extended things, material stuff. These substantial things are called Rupa Kalapas. Conventionally speaking, Rupa Kalapas are three-dimensional objects with space and volume. According to the Theravada tradition, these kalapas are momentary, they vanish as soon as they arise. The tradition holds to the notion that a single kalapa lasts for 17 mind moments, but there are arguments about this. While some of these kalapas are present, new material clusters arise owing to any of the four major causes: karma, consciousness, tejo, oja. Thus, rupa kalapas happen to exist in generations. So, while a kalapa is existing, another new kalapa will be born due to whatever one of the four causes. So, likewise, the kalapas, while a kalapa is still present, another kalapa would be born, so the generation would continue to happen. So this is how the four great elements exist within a kalapa. So then we go into another aspect, the contribution of primary and derived matter for a kalapa and their existence within a rupa kalapa. Right. So we are going into another topic. What are the contributions made by kalapas? What are the contributions made by the four great elements to a kalapa? So we now understand that how they coexist. Now we shall move into understand them quite deeply. Contribution of tejo for a kalapa. Contribution of a tejo for the kalapa. So what the tejo does it strengthens the remaining three natures. Patavi, tejo, vayu and apo function properly due to being heated or cooled by tejo. Tejo has two qualities according to the tradition, either coldness or heat. So these three qualities, the heat, the hardness, cohesion and the bloating nature would function properly when tejo is present. That's how the tradition explains. And also tejo is one of the major reasons for the arising of new kalapas. There are four major reasons for the rupas to appear, that is karma, consciousness, nutriment and another is the tejo. So when quantitatively observing the world, we find that most number of rupas in the world are produced by this tejo, not by the other three causes. So therefore, tejo is a contributor for the entire physical world to exist. The most number of rupas within our body is produced by tejo according to the Theravadians, and also the immaterial stuff outside our body and also what we wear, the clothes and so forth are produced. Most of the rupas in these things are productions of tejo. And the most important or most significant contribution of the tejo to the kalapa is it strengthens the rupa kala, the remaining rupas, so they can perform properly. And also it is obvious when looking into the functioning of the rupa from a conventional or from a practical perspective. When tejo is higher, the qualities of apo and vayu and also patavi increase and decrease. The simile is given by some theras are, this is a conventional explanation. When we heat something, it gets melted. When we heat the water, the air increases, the vaporation happens, and steam, it becomes steam, and when we cool down the steam, it turns into water. So the qualities of apo, vayu and patavi, their level of these qualities are greatly depending on these tejo. Seems like a conventional explanation, but when you come into the rupa kala, because when we want to explain about the liquidity, we cannot explain liquidity in terms of kalapas. It has to explain in terms of bodies of kalapa. Bodies of kalapa. Now, that is something that I would like to refer in future. We will be discussing in further lectures. We have rupa and we have kalapa, rupa kalapa. Then we have rupa santati, generation of rupas. Then we have rupa sarira. Rupa sarira means body of kalapas, a group of kalapas. Then we have rupa santana. Rupa santana means a body of kalapas that have a interrelationship. For instance, the human body is a rupa santana. Our kidney acts according to other body parts. Sometimes even the cells die, suicide themselves to protect the other cells. So they are interacting. So if something happens to the part of the body, some cells are being released in some other parts. Like white blood cells are released more due to when we have an infection in some place of the body. So likewise, the Rupa, the bodies of Rupas in which there is a interaction or interconnection is called Rupa Santana. So we have to explain, when we talk to explain Rupa, we have to focus on all these 5 aspects, all these 5 aspects. So this Rupa, yeah. So looking into the Rupa Kalapa even, now liquidity has to be explained in terms of Rupa Sarira. How the interkalapa functions, how the 4 great elements function within the kalapas, from one kalapa to another. That's how the liquidity has to be explained. But when you are focusing on one kalapa, still, and now the example similarly given by Theras, like the liquid nature of the changes into hardness when water is being cooled, when water is being heated, the vaporization or it turns into a steam and the vayu quality increases rather than the apo quality. So this has to be explained in terms of sariras, not in terms of kalapas actually, to be true. So anyway, within a kalapa, we normally say the tejo dhatu affects the rupas and it makes the rupas to function properly. So the kalapa would exist in a stable nature. And the next thing is, when the remaining rupas are strengthened by this tejo, it supports for the continuation of the generation for a longer period. Therefore, tejo is not only supportive to the kalapa itself, but also to the generation. That is the contribution of tejo, the kalapa, and to the santati. Then contribution of patavi for a kalapa. Patavi is the most prominent quality in the material world. It is the nature that gives a substantial attribute to these stuff that we experience, that we see and touch. So if patavi is now actually what is being held by apo is the patavi, the cohesion. What is being bloated by vayu is the patavi, and what is being heated by tejo is mainly patavi. So patavi acts like a surface upon which the other three elements could perform their functions. It's like a surface like base. It should not be misunderstood with a surface like a table upon which the things are kept. It's not that in a kalapa patavi is like this and tejo vayu are acting like this. No. So within the kalapa itself, if you go to the previous diagram, so the patavi exists in the entire area, and the other 3 elements are also existing on those locations, but they are performing their functions upon patavi. Patavi is the hardness upon which a tangible thing that which can be held, which can be bloated, or which can be heated. When the remaining 3 elements are performing their functions upon patavi, the other elements also get affected. For instance, when apo is holding patavi, not only patavi, vayu and tejo are also held by apo. When vayu is bloating patavi or pushing patavi outside, not only patavi, tejo and apo are also affected by it. When tejo is heating or cooling the patavi, even apo and vayu are affected by it. But if we think logically, what has been upon which these functions are mostly performed is the hardness, is the patavi. So therefore, without patavi, it's impossible to talk about a material world. So therefore, patavi gives the substantial quality to kalapa, which is a very important factor. Then a question can be asked: can tejo, vayu and apo could exist without patavi? It seems like it is possible. Seems like hypothetically it is possible. It's a thought experiment we are using. So if tejo exists without vayu, without patavi, together with apo and vayu, what would happen? If this is apo inside and Vayu the outside. It seems like, even in the Theravadian perspective, it seems like they could exist. But what happens? Then in the reality, a kalapa would be a packet of heat or coldness. Heat and coldness would be kept in one area due to apo. It would be pushed and allowed. The heat would exist in a certain area because of vayu. It is bloated by vayu. It doesn't get scattered due to apo. So there can be a sort of a cluster of 3 elements. But what happens? This seems like a packet of heat or packet of coldness. The significant characteristic would be 2 packets of coldness and 2 packets of heat could go through each other, because when there is no patavi, there is no resistance for the other substance to entering into that area. So therefore, when heat packets or cool packets are there without patavi, only tejo, vayu and apo are found, they may go through each other. There is no resistance. So what happens? The entire physical world would appear differently. It means we will be able to go through each other's body, right? So therefore, it's not possible according to the law of necessity, because the law of necessity says this is how it has to happen based on the physical laws, not the accidental view or the divine creation. Law of necessity. Therefore, patavi is a necessary factor. Otherwise, the entire physical world would have a completely different appearance, right? Different appearance. So, can other 3 elements, apo, tejo and vayu, exist without patavi? The kalapa loses its substantial nature if hardness is not present. If, for instance, patavi is not present, tejo would be confined to a certain area in the space and would exist as packets of heat and coldness. In such a scenario, one packet could go through another, since there is no hard surface of a kalapa that could prevent another kalapa entering into its arena. Then the entire physical world will have a different appearance. Right? So therefore, patavi is necessary. Patavi is a huge contributor for the kalapa. Then contribution of vayu and apo for a kalapa. I think it's clear now. Because of vayu, the rupa, the hardness and the heat, especially the hardness, exist in a certain area. It is spread out in a certain area. Because of apo, it is not let to get scattered in the area, in the space. So this shape or confinedness or a certain volume or a shape is given to the kalapa due to apo and vayu. So how do we understand these 2 forces? Cohesion. Now cohesion alone, it would be very difficult, rather difficult to explain how cohesion alone would perform, would act upon patavi, because how could we explain about a certain force that goes inside? We have to keep it in mind, because when apo is found only when vayu is there. So these are 2 opposing forces that are acting at the same time. So apo should be understood as the force opposite of vayu. Vayu is pushing outwards, apo is holding it or pushing inside. So vayu should be understood as the opposing force of apo. It pushes outwards without letting it to contract into the focal point of the zone. So these should be understood as 2 different forces opposite to each other. On the one hand, had apo existed without vayu, I think we have discussed this many times now, the entire kalapa would collapse into its center as if a celestial body would collapse into its gravitational center. On the other hand, had apo existed without had vayu existed without apo, the kalapa would burst out without getting confined to a certain area of space. So these 2 forces are utterly necessary for a kalapa to get a shape and to have a certain volume. Then can only patavi alone exist without apo and vayu? Can't patavi alone exist without apo and vayu? It's another question that we can ask. The hardness, can't hardness, just mere hardness exist without apo and vayu? Then what happens? The kalapas would not get a shape. The kalapas would not have a certain volume. So the entire physical world will definitely collapse. And the same thing happens if only Tejo appears, and it's only Vayu and Patavi and Tejo together are found without Apo and Vayu. What happens? The entire physical world would collapse. If one is missing, if Apo is missing, the things would get scattered. If Vayu is missing, things would shrink and collapse into its centers. So this is how the four great elements are contributing to Kalapa. To sum up, Patavi is the hardness, it gives the substantial quality to the Kalapa. Vayu and Apo gives the shape to the Kalapa and a certain volume. Due to Apo, the Kalapa, the Patavi doesn't get scattered in the air. Due to Vayu, the Patavi doesn't shrink or collapse into its central focal point. And Tejo is contributing to the Kalapa by strengthening the remaining Kalapas. Remaining Rupas. So they have a mutual support to each other. So that's why in Patthana it is mentioned that one Rupa supports the remaining three, the remaining three supports the one, and two are supporting two. So there is a mutual connection of these Kalapas. So it is impossible to have a one Rupa. It is impossible according to the law of necessity. It is not possible to have any Kalapas even at the absence of one Rupa. When Tejo is not present, according to Theravada, the others would not perform properly and the Rupas would not be something functional. When there is no Apo, it would get scattered. When there is no Vayu, everything would collapse into its center. When there is no Patavi, there is no substantial quality of the world. So therefore, it is not possible, according to the Theravadians, that we talk about an individual Rupa apart from others. Nothing to say about an individual Rupa. Even at the absence of one quality, the remaining three would not come into existence. So for the arising of, when they come into the existence out of haven't been before, for their arising, all four are necessary. For the persisting, all four are necessary. And also they are contributing for the especially the Tejo is contributing for the generational continuation of Rupas. And there are many other things to be discussed. We will be talking of them in the future lectures, how Rupas exist in in bodies, as bodies, and how they are acting as having a relationship with each other in a certain body as well. So this shows that, what does this mean? What does this suggest that? Implicitly or explicitly, whatever, what these teachings suggest is that the material stuff is not made out of one thing. So it is a combination of four great elements. Any of the great elements cannot be called as a self, cannot be called as I, because hardness itself, our mind is not ready to accept hardness as I. So what we have to do is to get rid of the self view, just focus on the attributes of these Rupas. The mind would not, if you focus on Patavi perfect, like with much attention, and consider it as a nature of hardness, the mind would start to say that this cannot be myself. Because hardness itself is not the self. Cohesion itself is not the self. The bloating nature itself is not the self. Even the heat or the coldness is not the self. So it shows that each of these elements are not self. So how can a gathering of these elements be a self? So this is the tiniest particle, tiniest Rupa that we can experience in the practical world. Physically, this is cannot be broken into any of its components. It can only be done with the intellectual analysis. But intellectual analysis shows that even a Kalapa is not existing in the reality, is a combination of four great elements. So this shows that the Rupa can never be Atta. Even when you go into the level of Kalapas, we find that it's not a one substance, because it's a part of various particles. Even if one particle, it's a combination of four things. So there's nothing to discuss about a self in this Rupa. It's just a gathering of various qualities. So this greatly helps for us to understand get rid of the self view. And when we talk about the functions, now Patavi is acting as a surface. Now when we come to the lectures about inter-Kalapa relationships, we would say that one Kalapa, a layer of Kalapas, would act as a surface to another layer of Kalapas. Doesn't let the other Kalapas go through it. So these functions can also be explained. It's not that I am holding this phone on my hand. Because of the patavi of this hand, this phone has been held. That's how it has to be explained according to Theravada teachings. It's not that I am holding this body without organization. Because of cohesion, this is held. It is not that I am moving forward because of the vayu, due to the mind, the vayu produced by mind, the body is moving. So likewise, when we understand the functions of these rupas, it will be helpful for us to get rid of the view of a working self, the acting self, the karakaditti. So likewise, with the lessons to come, we will be able to understand, get more and more insights about the teachings. So to sum up what we did today, so we focused on the kalapa, and we mentioned that there are two ways that the kalapas should be examined, from inside to outside and outside to inside, and how the four great elements exist within a kalapa, and what are their contributions to the kalapa, four great elements, and how it is helpful to our vipassana practice. So I would conclude the lecture and give the opportunity for the open the forum for the Q&A session. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Bhante. So hello everyone, just as usual, if you have any questions, you can ask by raising your hand or put your question in the chat box. Hi Bhante, I have two questions.
Yes, right.
So the first question is, so based on your explanation, then Apo and Vayu are like the opposite forces, right? And so they have opposite attributes. Then, so the question is, do we have any explanation in the tradition why Apo is not included in the Potapa? Because according to what I'm seeing is that because they are the two opposite forces, if we can feel this one, then we should be able to feel the other one. Right? So why Vayu is in Potapa, but Apo is not in Potapa?
So that is because Potaba always comes now. For instance, if we think about, now there are two types of Apo. Apo that acts within the Kalapa and the Apo that affects the other Kalapas even. That's why I'll be discussing them in few days. Like when two Kalapas are close to each other, sometimes it is difficult to separate them. So that is because of the effect of Apo upon each other Kalapa. So in all these cases, when we are touching, we are touching this thing from outside. Our hand or whatever the body part we are using is coming from outside to the kalapa. But as the Vayu Apo is inside force, like this is the kalapa and this is our touch, for example. As the Apo is working inside, shrinking the entire kalapa, this cannot be felt. But since Vayu is pushing outside, this can be felt when we touch, this pressure can be felt. So this inward force, if the inward force is to the hand, will be felt like it's been dragged. But this Apo is working on the kalapa itself. So there's no way that we can feel it by touching from outside. If the force is enacted on this hand, yes, we'll be able to feel that the dragging nature. Then the question comes what this dragging is. So anyway, but since while we are touching this kalapa from outside, as the Apo is working upon the kalapa only, not on the hand, it cannot be felt because it's now we are trying to touch it, but it's going in that same direction, not to the opposite direction. So since Vayu is coming this direction while we are touching, it can be felt. As Apo is working inside, even though we touch it, because it's only acting upon the kalapa, not on our hand, so it cannot be felt. Patavi as a quality, it prevents the hand from coming in, so it can be felt. As Tejo is a heat, is also acting as a quality, not as a force, so it can be felt. That's how the tradition explains about this.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. But then, and then you also mentioned that we have this, kind of shape of ourselves because of the Apo, right? And then, so is Apo internal or external from it? Is it internal of a Kalapa or external between the Kalapa?
Sometimes, like I shall come into this point. Now, Apo is working internal of the Kalapa. At the same time, there is a external quality of the Apo. So that Apo can be felt, like the dragging nature. So this Apo is holding this to this side and this to that side. It can be felt, it can be known. Now, for example, when we think about the Tejo, we normally say in the tradition, a Kalapa with Tejo, for example, we draw it with red color, Kalapa with Tejo, coming close to a physical body, what happens, this Tejo, Kalapa of Tejo, it has its own existence. What happens, this Tejo would affect this Rupa. It's not that this Tejo is going inside, it affects. Then what happens, this Rupa, the form of this Rupa starts to change. It gets affected. So it starts to change. So it means the Tejo is affecting. Tejo has a quality of affecting the other Rupas beyond these borders. Beyond its borders. Because the Rupa Kalapa has its own border, that is explained as the Paricheda. Rupa Kalapa, one Kalapa, even though they are touching each other, they have their separate limitations. So mentioning that a Kalapa would affect another Kalapa, especially the Tejo, it shows that these four great elements are performing their functions even beyond the Kalapas. So it's a very good question now, isn't this Apo, can't this Apo be felt? Yes, surely. If this Apo, now for example, if something is being dragged, like a force of the two magnets and a steel, so this is also has to be explained as Apo, the force of Apo is there. It's nothing other than that. So this Apo can, or other one, someone can say that the one reality increases the Vayu of the other reality and makes it to move towards that, but I would prefer it to explain as the Apo is performing their function. So that Apo has to be felt for sure, but the Apo within the Kalapa is not felt, since it's a internal thing.
Okay. So you mean the Apo that affecting the other Kalapa, we can feel it. So it should be part of the Kalapa somehow.
Seems like. That's how I understand. Because without the interkalapa reactions, we are not able to explain how the Rupa bodies exist. I will come to that. I will come into that lecture. It will be quite interesting. There will be a lot of questions and debates on that. I'll come into that lecture. How should we explain the interkalapa and what are the proofs within the tradition to show that how these four great elements are affecting beyond the Rupas, beyond the Kalapa even. But whether that has been taken as a significant effect is something other, is a different story. So otherwise, this dragging force should be explained as Apo, and we all know that can be felt. But when it comes to Pottabba, what the tradition is saying, that this now a question can be asked from the tradition itself. So when someone is dragging, you are feeling the drag. So what is that feeling? So what is the feeling that is felt? Is it Patavi, or is it Apo, or Tejo, or Vayu? Only possibility, if we stick into the tradition, only possibility is to attribute it to Vayu, the pushing nature, pushing outwards, someone can say. So then what happens when we are touching a stuff, touching a balloon, we can feel how the Vayu is pushing outwards, so we can feel it. But when someone is dragging you, is this the Vayu, again the Vayu, then what happens? We are feeling the Vayu of our body being pushed to outside, or is what we are feeling is pushing outside or being dragged? So this is a question that we have to ask from ourselves or from the tradition. So that's why I mentioned this. My personal idea is this should be attributed to Apo, but there can be arguments on that. If that is Apo, then seems like apo can be felt, but it's very clear that Pottabba is Patavi, Tejo and Vayu. There is no apo in it. The explanation of the tradition, the Mahatheras, some of the Mahatheras have given is, as apo is an internal force focused on the inside, it cannot be felt. It cannot be felt. So only when we come into the interkalapa reaction, this problem comes up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Sadhu. Please go ahead, Mr. Ananda.
Thank you, Doctor. One question. Actually, now two actually. One is, you said the reasons for Rupa Kalapa to appear. One is karma. What are the other three karmas?
Consciousness, Tejo itself, Tejo, and Oja, the nutriment.
Oh, Oja, okay. Now, but there are other Rupa Kalapas which are outside of this Nama Rupa concept, like when you look at a rock, for example. So how come that come to be like, there's no karma involved in that, right? Or are we here in this subject, are we just only talking about Nama Rupa related to Rupa, or
no,
or other Rupas as well?
When we talk Nama and Rupa, there are two types of Rupas, internal and external Rupas, animate and inanimate. So when we say Rupa, even the matter found in the Rupa falls in the category of Rupa, not into Nama, though it is not affected by karma. Therefore, when we say Nama and Rupa, it includes the entire world, not only living beings. Here we are, in these lectures, we are talking about the entire scope of Rupa, internal and external. So according to Theravadians, the external Rupa is produced by Tejo. External Rupa is produced by Tejo, not by karma or consciousness or nutriment. It's Tejo. So that's why I mentioned in the lecture that most of the Rupas, quantitatively, the most number of Rupas found in the world are productions of Tejo, not productions of karma or consciousness or nutriment. So according to Theravadians, the inanimate stuff is made out of Rupa in inanimate stuff is made out of Tejo, is produced by Tejo.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Alright, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante. Yeah. So hello everyone. If you have any question, you can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat box. Oh, you want to continue asking questions, Mr. Ananda?
Yeah, just actually, just on to that same question. So one thing, for us, for a human being or for a sentient being, what matters to us is always Nama Rupa related Rupa, Rupa related to Nama Rupa, right? Because even when we see a rock outside, so what matters to us is how do we see that? So that becomes a Nama Rupa. Correct? Can you say like that?
No, what I say is now even the outside world belongs to Rupa. When we say Nama Rupa, it's not only confined to ourselves. Now this stuff belongs to Rupa, though it doesn't have Nama. So when Buddha said Nama and Rupa are mutually connected, that is, he is referring to the human beings. So when
you say
living beings.
When we say, sorry, go ahead.
So when we say Nama and Rupa are interrelated, that is specifically talking about the living beings. But
yes,
when we take we call it inclusive term of Nama and Rupa. Inclusive means including all the possibilities. Even this stuff falls into Rupa. So when we are seeing something, we are seeing a Rupa. So the
yes,
the observing mind is Nama. How we see that Rupa is something else. It can be either you see the Rupa as a Rupa or Rupa as a conventionally as a living being. So it's like if we draw this, that is the lecture that I have been doing in Sinhalese classes these days. For instance, this is the consciousness, for example. The I would rather say mentalities. This belongs Chitta and Cetasikas both. Then there is the object, Arambana. Then how the object is being seen, object is known, is called how the object is known or seen, whatever. So for instance, the Panyati falls here. Panyati is never found outside.
Yes.
When I say the object, we are referring to the reality, but this is exceptional. This doesn't include the idea when a consciousness takes the abhava panyati, the absence of a reality. Then we have to explain it a bit differently. So in all the other cases, objects are realities. Then how the object is seen, it has two possibilities. Seeing a reality, or seeing a reality as a concept. Panyati. So Panyati comes here, how the object is being seen. Panyati cannot be found independent of the mind. So then if you are talking about the Nama and Rupa, this doesn't fall into Nama. According to the Theravadians, how the object is being seen is attributed to the side of the object. For example, if the object, a reality object is known as a reality, if a reality object is known as reality, we call the object in that experience, object is a reality, Paramatta object. If an object, this is still there can be some analysis on this, this is roughly mentioning. If the object is seen as a concept, then we say, rather than saying the object is a reality, we say object is a concept, Panyati. Right? So sometimes, now this, how the object is known and the object, these are two things. Is it a reality? No. It is how the perception and the mind, the mental cluster sees the object, the way, the manner the object is being seen, object is perceived according to Theravadians. It's not a reality. Is it a function of the mentalities? Can't be attributed to the mentalities alone? No, Theravadians put it to the object side. Why is that? Each and every object. Now sometimes there can be a mere idea about the object, but the object may not exist. For example, according to Buddhism, thinking about Almighty God, there is an idea, but the object doesn't really exist. Then the question comes, doesn't that chitta have an object? Yes, it has an object. What is that object? That is the idea. So the manner is also put into this side, object group, in the object group. So when we are seeing a Rupa, how it is seen doesn't matter. The Nama would be the mentalities, these are Nama. Then this is if it is a Rupa, this is the Rupa. This is Rupa. And if that Rupa is seen as a concept, this we have the Panyati. In such a case, we call the object of the mind is the Panyati, not the Rupa. If the Rupa is seen as a Rupa, we say the object of the mind is the Rupa, the reality itself. Then in some place, even though that can be found in Dhammasangani commentary, please look into I think Upadanatika. Right, Upadanatika, not the Dukkha, Upadaniya Dhamma. We can find that even the body, the Rupas of an Arahant can be known. Now we can think someone's body, okay, just give a simple example. Someone's body is made out of 4 elements. We think it as our parent, our father, mother, brother, or a self, whatever it is. So this is a conventional concept, is the idea. But the commentary says, even though the concept is the object, but in reality, this concept is about a reality. In the actual world, the concept is about a reality, 4 great elements. So it's not a fault if someone says, even while we are taking concept Panyati as objects, if someone says the object is the reality, that is still correct. That is still correct. So now then we have to understand when and how object is referred within the tradition. Object is referred within the tradition. So this in some places when the reality is known as a reality, in the number 1 case, a reality is known as a reality, we say the object is the reality. Not here, we bring it here actually. In some cases we may bring it here. I will discuss this when we come to the lesson of Varamana. There is the second case when a reality is known like as a concept. We normally mention the object is the concept. But still, if someone says that still the object is the reality, that is still perfectly correct according to the tradition. So I think now the question is, in such a incident, nama is the observing qualities, not how it is being observed, not how it is being observed. Rupa belongs to the object, and this is how it has been known. If it is known as a concept, we still also say the concept object is the concept. These are the possibilities that we can have about the things. Now, if someone is observing a nama, for instance, right? It's not only Rupa that we are observing. We sometimes think about our own self, the way we thought yesterday, the way we thought 1 moment ago. Then the object is a nama. Object is a nama. Still, that nama can be known as a nama, mere chitta, reality as a reality. Some people may think that nama is I thought so. That is I who thought, taking reality as a concept. In such a scenario, there is no Rupa involving. It's nama and nama. Where is the Rupa involvement of Rupa here? Is the base on which the Vattu Rupa which became the base for this nama. So then we have nama and Rupa, so putting here. There is no Rupa from the side of the object. Yeah, this is how I would explain. I don't know whether I really touched the question.
Yeah, but so I think it's clear. So my actual question was, if there is no human being, for example, no sentient being, then the question of nama rupa is not coming, but the rupa is there. That's my question.
No, then the nama rupa is here.
Sorry, I didn't see that. I think you're.
The nama rupa is base. Now this chitta is associated with the I becomes.
Assuming there is no sentient being. Assuming there is no person seeing, then the question of nama rupa does not arise. It's only a rupa or somewhere.
Yes. Not an object. Then there is no one to take it as an object. It's just rupa is existing.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, but just the rupa is there.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Bhante. The next question is, what is the main difference between Rupa Sarira and Rupa Santana?
Rupa, it's a good question.
Is Sarira a part of Santana or not?
Yes.
Can the Bhante please give an example that we can use in meditation?
Rupa Sarira and Rupa Santana, sometimes they are interchangeable. Some places Santana can be referred as a Sarira, Sarira can be referred as a Santana. So when I mention a Santana, I am referring to a specific quality of the Rupa, that they are interacting each other. Now think about a human body. Each and every part, most of the parts of the body are connected with each other, even though they are separate elements. Now something happens to our knee, a wound, the white blood cells are being released from some other place. Now if we think as completely different realities, like a group of rocks collected with it, if we do something to a certain rock, other rock is not going to get affected. Other rock is not working to prevent it. But when a wound happens in our body, other parts of the body are working on that to heal this. So what does it mean? The entire thing is acting as a one unit. Rupas in different places are related to rupas in other places. We know that in biology we call apoptosis, right? The cell suicide, called apoptosis or something. Apoptosis or something, I forgot the word. So according to that, cells commit suicide, they die by themselves. It doesn't mean that they have a consciousness. They they die by themselves to prevent the cancerous cells occurring that could harm the other cells. So this is the functioning of a santana. And if you think about a piece of inanimate thing, that santana, it's sarira means a bunch of rupa. Our body is a santana at the same time a sarira. Now think about this material thing. This is a bunch of rupa, but these rupas are not related to each other in the manner that our body is related. The manner the parts of the body are related to each other, there is no such a relationship. But there is a certain relationship, because rupas of this santana, of this sarira, now even though I touch this material plate, I can separate my finger from it at any time, very easily. But it is not quite easy to separate these pieces because they are bound with each other. Though according to Theravadians, they are completely different realities, even according to science, they are separate entities. There is a certain bond with each other. So there is a connection. So Rupa Sarira means rupas that are connected with each other and they act as a one unit, but there is no interconnection like in human body. So when I say santana, I am referring to bodies of rupas which have interconnection with each other. When I say sarira, I am referring to a group of rupas, specifically on that group nature, not focusing on santana. But according to the Dhamma, you can call this a Rupa Santana. You can call it a Rupa Santana. Though we don't have that interrelationship. So therefore, in these lectures, when I say a Santana, for instance, hair itself is a Sarira. The entire body is Santana. But if you biologically investigate, the hair itself has, the particles of the hair are also interrelated with each other. So it acts as a santana. So either you take it as a santana or sarira, it doesn't matter. So my emphasis is, what I want to emphasize is, some rupas, though they exist separately from each other, they are interrelated. They act as a one unit. And also, some rupas, though they are not much interrelated with each other, they stay with each, though they are separate entities, they stay with each other with a bonding nature. So that's the explanation of santana and sarira. So santana and sarira, now we have three types of santana. Nama santana, generation of minds. Rupa santana, the rupas, generation and the bunch of rupas. And Nam Rupa Santana, because there is also interrelationship, because when I have an intention to lift my hand, if this Venerable stands up, what would happen? For example, I think to stand up, someone else stands up because of my intention. So then it's a huge chaos in the world. When I want to lift my arm, if someone is lifting the arm instead of me, so it means but it's only I am who is lifting. So it shows that my Nama is connected to my Rupa only, not to someone else. So the Nama and Rupa is collectively also acting as a Santana, because they are interrelated. When someone hit my body, it's only I who get the pain, not someone else. The Nama here would feel the pain, not someone else. So Nama and Rupa are also interrelated. So there are three types of Santana: Nama Santana, Rupa Santana, Nama Rupa Santana. You can find these words in Abhidhamma Tika. I think it's Anutika or Mulatika, I forgot actually. I shall give you the references when it comes to those lectures. Therefore, it's very, very useful. Now think about Kayanupassana Satipatthana. Kayanupassana Satipatthana, the observing, the breath body. Kaya means group of Rupa. Kaya means a group. So according to Lady Sayadaw, Venerable Lady Sayadaw, while we are doing Kayanupassana, specifically, we don't have a pure ultimate object, Paramatta object. Our object is always mixed with Panyati, because we are unable to, we are taking groups of Rupas in Kayanupassana. So Samuha Gana, the idea of compactness is still there. Therefore, the idea of, so though they are taken as a group, it doesn't mean that it is a self. Because To get rid of the idea of self is another point. The things that are together doesn't indicate it's a self. To get rid of the idea of self, there are three ways that we have to focus. First is seeing things as mere natures. That is the first punch that we give to the self view. Consider something as a hardness. It's just a cohesive nature, heat or coldness, or the bloating nature, the color itself, the sound itself. Our mind is not ready to accept each of these qualities as self. So if you try to focus on these natures separately one after another, automatically the idea would come that this is not a self. It has to come because our mind is not ready to accept this idea. When we think about a self, we are talking about the entire thing. Then the second way to get rid of the self view is know that these natures are products of other causes, other natures, conditioned nature. The second way to get rid of the self idea. Third nature is uncontrollable nature. If something passes away naturally, despite our wish, even though we wish it may not pass away, may not bring suffering, if it is acting in its own nature, regardless of our wish, regardless of our expectations, it shows that it is out of control, avasavattana. Because our self, the idea of self is based on idea that it is controllable. We act according to our wish. I do whatever I want. So that's now, for that we have to analyze what is our self view. We have to have an acute analysis about what is the components of our self view, to what sort of a thing that we want to accept as a self. It's a one thing, unchangeable, unchanging thing that acts upon its wish, which can depend on itself, which is not depending on something else, like eye consciousness is depending on chakku. So when we understand that it is passing away, the self will go. So therefore, knowing Rupa in clusters is not a burden for this, it's not a hindrance for this. And it makes your meditation quite easy. So even we are focusing on a cluster of Rupas, Rupa Sariras or either Rupa Santanas, the pivotal, the most important message or the point is that you have to understand them as mere natures, not as selves, just qualities, just the hardness or thing with the hardness. It doesn't matter, even you think it as a thing with the hardness, still it is enough for your meditation. But that qualitative attribute should be felt, should be known, because we are not ready to call a certain quality, because that quality cannot be changed. It's fixed. When we are saying that realities have their intrinsic natures, it shows that there is a limitation in their capacity. Patavi can never be cohesion. Apo, hardness can never be cohesion. Cohesion can never be hardness. It has these intrinsic natures. So it shows that they are independent and they are helpless, because if not they are supported by others, they cannot come into existence. So therefore, it's quite important that it makes your meditation quite easier. So focusing on clusters of Rupas as mere Rupas is enough for you to progress in the path. It's not necessarily that you see all the Rupa Kalapas or even you break the Kalapas as I did. It's not necessarily. If you can focus, like there are certain parts, the certain molecules are there or certain particles are there with certain quality, the hardness and cohesion and so forth, then it is enough to subdue our self-view.
Thank you, Bhante. Yeah, I don't see any more questions, and I think time is also up.
Thank you for joining. We shall continue with the derived matter in a Kalapa tomorrow. I shall distribute a handout today night, evening, and we shall continue with the same topic about Kalapa. Today we finished the primary matter. Tomorrow we are discussing about the derived matter. So with this merit, all of us will be able to gain supreme bliss Nibbana as soon as possible. Buddha sasanang chirantitthatu. Buddha sasanang chirantitthatu. Buddha sasanang chirantitthatu. Sadhu sadhu.